Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Elevenses. Be interesting to see what the viewing numbers are today, as people are definitely getting back out there on their motorcycles. In the show for you today, we have the first story. The video link is already up there. Something a bit unusual, naked man stealing a bike in Thailand. We'll be looking at how the Secretary of State, Grant Shapps, is getting behind motorcycling, what the motorcycling organisations in the UK themselves are doing to encourage the government to think bike in their transport policy. We'll be looking at another e-bike that you probably never heard of. This one's from New Zealand. And finally, we'll be giving you some advice, really, about what you can tell somebody that you know who may be thinking in terms of getting onto two wheels themselves, and some of the pitfalls and things that they should look out for. So, okay. You're watching Kevin Williams here with Elevenses, and we'll be here for the next 30 minutes or so. One other thing to say, don't forget, I will be running the interview, second part of the interview on bike suspension, how to tune it with Dave Moss, expert in suspension and setup, on Monday at 11. So pop back on Monday to hear Dave. Right, okay, so on with the show. The UK probably know had a spate of bike jacking, which seems to have died down somewhat. Doesn't seem to be hitting the headlines quite as much as it was, possibly because the police started to take some rather more robust action when bikes were being stolen. But what you probably wouldn't expect to happen is to have your motorcycle stolen by a naked man. Well, this is exactly what happened in the southern province of Thailand on Sunday. A completely naked man seized a motorcycle from the rather shocked woman rider, and despite being chased, rode away on it. Now, you can use the video link, which I've already put up, to actually see a Thai news item with the video a couple of seconds into the clip. The incident occurred in broad daylight and in full view of witnesses, and of course nothing much happens these days without somebody filming it on a phone. So naturally the incident was videoed and it was posted on Facebook, and it predictably went viral. So yes, you can see the link for yourself down below. It seems that the whole incident kicked off when rescue workers actually found the man sleeping starkers beside the road, a short distance away. They put him into a vehicle intending to take him to hospital. But it seems that whilst in transit, he became very agitated, and when the vehicle stopped at a junction, he jumped out, sat down on the pavement, and that's where the unfortunate woman happened upon him when she stopped at a red traffic light some moments later. Anyway, the police apparently found the man shortly afterwards at a nearby market, still in the nude, where he was arrested and taken to hospital for assistance and a new set of clothes. Whether the female rider involved got a bike back isn't actually reported, unfortunately. Hopefully she did. Okay, so still to come on the show, I will be looking at another utility motorcycle, an electric one, but this one will have a bit of a twist, which I'll talk about later. And we'll also be looking at how you can give some useful advice to people who might be looking to use a motorcycle to commute to work while public transport is a bit tricky, let's put it that way. But first of all, what's going on in Parliament and how is motorcycling being promoted by the rider organisations? Well, you probably recall, if you're a regular here, that a few days ago I sort of ran through my ideas of how motorcycling might be going as the country attempts to extricate itself from the coronavirus pandemic. Hopefully we're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel in that direction. But the motorcycles themselves probably have a role to play. But what I pointed out was it's almost certainly not in the way that we're used to seeing. It's not going to be the barnstormer BMWs or the big cruisers from Harley and the likes of sports bikes from the Japanese manufacturers that we're going to see people wanting to use. I think there's going to have to be a complete realignment of the way that we think about two-wheelers. And one of the things I mentioned is the potential role of a utility bike for carrying things that are too bulky to lug around on foot or on bicycle, but over relatively short distances. So rather than just move the rider, we're actually looking to move something useful. I also flagged up the role of motorcycles that are powered by battery to get people to work. And it seems I'm not the only one thinking this way, because the Secretary of State for Transport, the Right Honourable Grant Shapps MP, has made an official statement in support of using motorcycles at this time. Now, he was responding to a question put by Julian Lewis, who's the MP for New Forest East, and he's a member of the all-party parliamentary group on motorcycling. Now, if you've never heard of that, basically it's exactly what it says. It's a cross-party group and often made up of motorcyclists within the House, and they regularly lobby on behalf of motorcycling to the rest of Parliament. So, you know, when people say that our MPs ignore our input, they're not absolutely correct. There is always this all-party group which is actually putting the case for motorcycling. So anyway, Julian Lewis, MP for New Forest East, he put the question: as an alternative to using public transport during the crisis, what assessment has my right honourable friend made of the desirability of urging bikers like me once again using motorcycles for travelling to work? And will he be taking any steps to incentivise motorcycle usage as the lockdown is gradually eased? Now, given the somewhat negative portrayal of motorcycling over the years, across various councils and things. We talked only just recently about how Oxfordshire County Council had produced a very lopsided assessment document, an engagement document, well, I forget what it's called now, with motorcyclists. We tend to come to think that motorcyclists are negatively portrayed, but this is what Mr. Shapps had to say in reply. He said, motorcycles are an enormously important way of getting around. 2.7 billion miles were travelled by motorcycle in 2018, the last year for which we have data. We're working on a number of projects, including sorting out potholes, which are a huge problem for motorcycles and other two-wheeled vehicles. I also encourage him, at whatever age, to adopt the electric motorbike. Now, if that really does reflect government thinking and isn't just sort of a bit of waffle to keep the questioner happy, then that does seem to me to be a fairly positive sign about the way the government is actually seeing motorcycling. Now, words are one thing, action is something completely different, of course, as we know all too well. We've been promised pothole repairs for quite a few years now. I don't see them happening. In fact, I see the roads getting worse. But there could be, significant movement in certain ways. I mean, certainly in London, for example, removing the emission charges for small motorcycles might be a good start. I'm sorry, but if you're riding a whacking great 1200cc bike into London every day and you're not meeting the emission standards, then you're no better than a car. And I don't see why you should get away with being able to do that when a car driver can't, even if you are easing congestion. But if you're riding a small motorcycle, then why not? Small cc bikes do pollute less than big ones. They pollute less than most cars. But we need to be prioritizing what works for the environment and what works for the community. Now, the following day, a coalition of motorcycle interest groups in the UK, the Motorcycle Action Group, the Vintage Motorcycle Club, Trail Riders Fellowship, and the British Motorcyclists Federation jointly submitted what they call a white paper to Mr. Shapps. And they also sent it to all of the 3 devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. But basically, what this white paper calls for is for the government to take full account of the role of motorcycling as the UK continues to deal with the COVID-19 crisis and what they're calling its aftermath. I think we're a bit early to talk about aftermath. We're still in the middle of it, really. But hey-ho. The white paper reviews ways that the crisis is affecting motorcycle riding right now, and discusses conditions under which motorcyclists can ride safely during the various alert phases that Boris and the government were talking about a few days ago. That's fair enough, but we have to think about how we're riding. The coalition also sets out the case for a government-supported code of guidance for maintaining social distancing for motorcycling in the present situation, and also asks how restrictions affecting motorcycling can be gradually lifted as we move into the future lockdown phases as restrictions are eased. Now, the official supported code of guidance is actually quite important, because right now everybody's putting their own spin on the guidance that Boris gave out and the government attempted to clarify without a great deal of success the following day. Various people are arguing that motorcyclists are naturally socially distanced, and what do? They immediately go out for a group ride with a bunch of mates and all head off to a cafe somewhere and stand around nattering. So, we do need some official guidance where people cannot interpret it to suit themselves. Sorry to say that, sorry to bang on about the same topic over and over again, but I do feel that we need to take this fairly seriously. And probably, though, the most important element is that it makes that case for the use of motorcycles and not just cycling and walking as a means of getting around. And I think that's going to be important during our crisis exit strategy and also beyond it as well, into what is almost certainly going to be a fairly significantly changed world. Right, okay, so just a reminder, you are watching Elevenses live with Kevin Williams. We are talking various topics about motorcycling. You probably realised I also hold some fairly controversial views, and I'll be giving you some biking tips in the course of these Elevenses programs. Don't forget, you can also read if you can't ride. There are still riders who are locked down for one reason or another. You can head over to my Lulu website and find my books off sale. It's undergoing a bit of a renovation at the moment, and the company that prints my books has probably chosen the worst possible time to do a major overhaul, and the site's not working particularly well, but try and bear with me. As long as I can't, there's nothing I can do about that, but hopefully they will get it sorted out fairly soon. Okay, so on to the third bit I wanted to talk about. Now, as I said, some journeys that we are being encouraged to do not by using public transport, not by car, simply aren't feasible to be done on foot or cycle, either due to the distance, possibly the terrain. In fact, we need to carry something. And motorcycles do offer a stopgap, and perhaps if councils and riders can be persuaded to see the benefits of small cc engine bikes and the relatively inexpensive short-range electric motorcycles, we can start to promote those, and maybe we can start to make them move into the mainstream. So let me introduce you to the next electric bike manufacturer you probably never heard of. They're called UBCO. I don't know if they intend that to be pronounced UBCO or not, but anyway, that's who they are. And they're based in New Zealand, and they make what they call electric utility vehicles. Now, they've already tackled markets in Australia, the US, and Asia, and they've launched two-phase unveiling of their range of bikes in Europe here. And they're now distributing to Spain, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Lithuania, and the UK. There are two bikes that they are offering at the moment. The FRX1, which is basically a trials motorcycle by appearance. And the one that caught my eye, rather more interest probably, is their utility e-bike. Now, what it's described as is a dual environment vehicle, and they're saying that it's good for on-road as well as off-road use. But it has one unique feature, which I'll be coming on to in just a moment's time. I meant to put a photo up of the bike, but I've completely forgotten. I won't be fiddling around with the computer trying to find it, so I'll do it in a minute. The suspension system's fairly standard stuff. It's a sort of sprung fork at the front and sprung fork at the rear. But they say it's designed to deal with the hardest jobs to which it can be subjected in New Zealand. And as you probably know, having been out there twice over the last couple of years to work on the Shiny Side Up project out there, I do have some experience of New Zealand, and I can tell you that it is a fairly rugged country. Anything that can survive out there is probably going to deal with most problems that we can. Okay, I am back. Apologies for that. As you can see, still experiencing some broadband problems here. That was the phone line going. As soon as the phone rang, the broadband dropped out. That's not an ideal situation. We're still trying to get that sorted out. Right, okay, so anyway, I'm back. Right, so I'll carry on where I was. I was talking about the motorcycle from UBCO from New Zealand. And I said it was a utility bike designed as a dual environment on-road and off-road machine. And as I said, it has one unique feature, which I'll be coming on to in just a moment. But I just got to the bit where it said that it's suitable for the hardest jobs to which it can be subjected into New Zealand. And as I pointed out, having ridden around New Zealand a couple of times, it's a pretty rugged country. So I suspect that anything it can do there, it can do in the UK. Now, what UBCO have done with this machine is to make it road legal. So it's been basically been fitted with everything you need for a road legal motorcycle. It's got brake lights, it's got indicators, it's got reflectors, speedo, odometer, LED headlight with a high and low beam. Okay, probably needs mirrors as well. But it also includes the cut-offs, which is it's got a steering lock on it, and it comes with the obligatory Bluetooth system for managing the electric battery system. Now, as I say, it's a utility bike, so one of the things you get with this machine is 19 accessory lugs which are placed around the bike. They allow you to attach anything, it says, from a holster to your work tools to storage bags. And the bike's also designed to pull a trailer, which is an interesting feature for a small machine like this. Now, what's it powered by? Well, the answer is a 50-volt, 48-amp-hour removable lithium-ion battery pack. That not only powers the bike, of course, but just like the Cake Osa that I reviewed the other day, you can power tools or just charge your phone on it. So the bike's got a couple of USB takeoffs and a 12-volt outlet too. The quick charge time that's quoted is a fairly disappointing 6 to 8 hours, which probably means you're going to be charging it up overnight. But presumably, if you were sort of working out on a farm building somewhere which had an outlet, you could plug it in while you're out there. top speed. It's 50 kph or 31 miles per hour, which means it's classed as a moped in the UK. There's no clutch and no drivetrain to worry about. It's pretty light at just 63 kilos or 140 pounds for those of you who still think imperial. And the estimated range is somewhere around about 70 odd miles. So that's a fair amount of riding around your farm or commuting. The price, well, it's 6,999 euros plus shipping, but including, it says, VAT. Although it also says that it's subject to currency fluctuations and market issues, so that could vary. But I mentioned there's a unique feature. Well, that is, it's a 2x2. It's driven from both wheels. There are two air-cooled electric motors, and they are located in the hubs of the wheels, one front and obviously enough one at the back too. Now, a two-wheel drive layout for a motorcycle isn't new. It's been tried before. The first time I saw that would probably be back in the 1980s, I would guess. But the problem with using an internal combustion engine to power a two-wheeled drive motorcycle has always been to find some kind of a flexible drive that bends with the steering. It's relatively straightforward to get to the back wheel, which only goes up and down. It's relatively straightforward to mount a shaft or a chain to that. But to deal with the front wheel, which not only moves up and down but moves from side to side too, you need a linkage somewhere in the drive, and various ways have been tried with chains and shafts and all sorts of weird things. Probably the most successful version, if I recall correctly, was a two-wheel off-road bike, which I think had a hydraulic drive to the front wheel. So basically the transmission was through pressurized fluid in bendy pipes, which then drove a motor at the front wheel with the hydraulic power. But obviously mounting the engine, as it were, the electric motor within the front wheel itself, avoids all need to actually transfer the drive down the steering, down the forks. You just need to connect it with wires. So that's obviously a lot easier. Now, the manufacturer claims that having two-wheel drive, that you can tackle almost any environment you can throw at it. That's their words. But one of the things that they're also touting this as is something that could be used as a street motorcycle, and they're aiming at something perhaps like the fleet market, where small deliveries could be carried out using these bikes with their luggage carrying capacity. Now, I'll show you a picture when I get to the end of the show. I was going to try and do it earlier, but I forgot to set it up. Just like the Ossa cake I featured last week, you're hardly going to buy this UBCO 2x2 on its looks. But if your needs revolve around usability, I reckon it could just about find a market. Now, okay, just a reminder, you are watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams. I will be broadcasting every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sunday at 11 BST. I may review that depending on how we go in the next few days with the lockdown relaxation. But for now, that's when you'll find me on air. Any changes, and I'll let you know in plenty of time. And if you've missed a show, you can always catch up here on Facebook, or you can head over to my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK. Right, okay. Okay, if you're looking to travel to work, how about a 125? Now, if you're watching Elevenses, you're probably already a motorcyclist. So you may be wondering why I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of commuting to work on a small machine. But there's a good chance that you will know someone. Well, if you don't know them now, you'll know them likely in the next week or three. Maybe family, possibly friends, likely to be co-workers, who isn't too happy right now with the idea of commuting to work on a train, in the tube, or via a bus. Now, how do we get to work without public transport if that's what we've used before? Some people will be able to use a car. If you have plentiful parking and you're living in a rural area and working somewhere not too built up, there's a fair chance you'll be able to park. But if you're in a city, you've got two issues. First of all, you've got to get to work. Now, it's likely that a significant number of the people who are returning to work will switch away from public transport. Some won't, but some will. And if they switch to cars, the likelihood is that we will actually generate traffic congestion, even with fewer people moving back and forwards to work. There was some footage from a traffic camera that I saw on Wednesday morning showing a long queue at the Blackwall Tunnel, where I would normally expect to see a queue. If that number of people cause the queue to, that's the cat who wants to be in the picture. There's Pussycat. Let's put you down again, Pussycat. Off you go, Mossy. If a reduced number of people are causing the sort of queue that we expect when the full commuters are out and about, then once we start to move back to a full resumption of work, we're going to get even worse congestion. So that's a significant issue. And in any case, if you're driving to work, you sort of park somewhere. So factor in the moves as well that are going to make busy city streets more cycle and pedestrian oriented, and to move away from a car-dominated transport system. And driving a car is going to become a significant issue in cities. Now, as I said, walking and cycling may be fine for short distances, but if you're cycling 6 or 7 miles and you're not particularly fit, that's a bit of an issue. And if you're cycling in a hilly area, then it's a really tough call. And if you're then trying to carry something heavy as well, shopping perhaps, or just work kit like I don't know, tools or something, a bicycle really isn't an option. And now some help from an engine is definitely going to be welcome. Now, the advantage of a small motorcycle, and this is something I hope that the rider groups that we were talking about earlier will actually address, is that they kind of blur the line between bikes and cycles and powered vehicles. They are reasonably cycle friendly. Motorcycles in London have been sharing bus lanes with cyclists now for quite a few years, and the anticipated carnage never happened. So I don't see any issues for motorcycles, particularly in low speed limit areas where the limits are down to 20, if motorcyclists obey those limits and ride sensibly within those cycle lanes. I don't see any issue in sharing the road. So it all points to small motorcycles, lightweight bikes, as a viable transport choice. So what decisions do people have to make? Now, what can you help them with? Well, first of all, they're going to be balancing practicality and convenience and the cost and risk. Let's get the risk out of the way. I wouldn't normally recommend that people ride on a CBT alone, because in my opinion, as a former CBT instructor, it simply isn't adequate preparation for the road. However, it's difficult, if not impossible, to get hold of bike tests at the moment. I believe they are still being carried out for special, key workers, but I know that the training schools who are trying to provide them have had some difficulty. So training schools are still knocking out CBTs, and some schools that are shut I know are looking at how they can restart. So getting on the road with a CBT is relatively straightforward. And you will need a CBT even if you're a car driver, unless your car license dates back to, if I remember correctly, 1990. But don't quote me on that. Do check the date. It's quite a long time ago. Okay. Now, as I say, the risk factor that any new rider is at high risk in the first few weeks of riding. So it's important not to take chances of ending up on your backside. Obviously, take it easy while you learn the route. Don't try filtering like a hero on the first ride would be my first bit of advice. Sit in the queue. Might take you a bit longer, but you'll get to see what other people do. You'll get to figure out where filtering is relatively safe. And then you can start to filter cautiously, not very quickly, only in big gaps, and don't do it where anybody is likely to turn right or left, because you will find cars coming at you from both sides while you're passing stationary queues. We can also attempt to manage the risk by using some decent protective clothing. Now, personally, if you're on a limited budget, I would spend relatively less on the helmet and relatively more pushing the boat out a bit on the rest of the kit. Why is that? Well, helmets all pass a decent test standard these days. And although the top of the range helmets may exceed it by some margin, one of the big problems with older helmets was that they simply didn't stay on the head during an impact. And that's much, much more likely these days. Even with the cheap helmets, if the helmet isn't on your head, it's no use whatsoever. If it is on your head, it will give you a significant amount of protection. The fit's important, much more than the brand, in my opinion. So I would say get a reasonable helmet. I wouldn't get one from eBay or from a market corner or something like that. Bike shop, a reputable supplier is a good idea. Try it on is always better than ordering out by the mail either. So based on the research that I've done with the items I've run on protective clothing here on Elevenses over the last few weeks, and the interviews we've had with the clothing experts, I'd really be looking at a minimum AA standard, even if all you're going to do is ride in town. If you can't find it, you're just going to have to make do with what you can get. But make sure it's got some body armor in it, because the armor doesn't protect you so much against impact as abrasion when you do fall off. Make sure you've got decent boots and gloves too. Hands and feet are common points of impact and easily damaged in crashes. So think about how you're going to protect those. I would also recommend that you advise anybody who is buying a bike to think about the bike. First of all, crash proof it if you possibly can. First thing I did when I bought my very first bike, a 125, was to fit crash bars, and 498 miles later I was very glad that I had, because I fell off it on the way to the 500-mile service. The crash bars took the brunt of the crash. I was able to finish riding it to work, and then go and get it tested, service that evening, drop it into service, and ride it away again a couple of days later with nothing more than a couple of grazes on my knee through my jeans. Think too about what you want to buy. The EU regs mean that the youngest riders are now stuck with 125 for 2 years until they're 19, whether they pass test or not. So what's happened is that the previously pretty much ignored 125 market is now full of really tasty looking bikes. There's an RS Aprilia, which is absolutely gorgeous. I think it's a lovely looking bike. There's some nifty Ninjas from Kawasaki. There's a GSXR replica from Suzuki, and there's a particularly fantastic looking Honda Naked as well. But think about those bikes. They often come with lots of vulnerable bodywork, which is the first thing to hit the deck when you fall off. What can you do to protect it? Well, crash bungs rarely do the job. The older style crash bars are a lot better for that. Plastic bodywork rarely crashes well. It's expensive. And the other thing to look out for, you probably won't think about this, but it's important. Look for where the indicators are bolted. If they're bolted into something vulnerable like a radiator, and I know some expensive bikes which you do exactly that, a low speed spill will actually write the radiator off too. So think about which bits are going to be damaged if it goes down. Think too about the theft issue. It's lovely to throw a sort of leg over a nice shiny brand new expensive machine, but they're theft magnets, simple as that. Think about where you're going to park the bike, who will have access to that parking area, and budget for locks and a cover rather than for a shiny motorcycle. New or second hand? Well, first thing I'll say is, when choosing a second-hand bike, check what Euro standard it is for emissions, because that could matter if you're heading into a city centre. You don't want to end up with something that actually gets you charged to go into a town centre. And more cities are going to be introducing emission zones. Second thing about second-hand bike is that it has almost certainly led a hard life. They get thrashed mercilessly, obviously, because they're not particularly quick. They're rarely serviced, and they're usually abused by novice owners. Mature owners sometimes just as bad as the youngsters for that, who have bodged fixes and crash repairs. A typical sort of thing I will see is that somebody's knocked a couple of links out of the chain to make it go a bit further, which means, of course, it no longer fits the teeth on the sprockets, and all you end up with is accelerated wear and sooner or later, no drive from the bike either. But it can be hard to spot if you don't know what you're looking for. So take someone along to have a look at a bike that knows what they're doing would be my advice. If you can find one with full service history, that is a bonus. It really is. And what make and model? Well, you can find Chinese, Korean, Indonesian, as well as Japanese motorcycles on the market now. If you're on a tight budget, you have to decide whether or not you're willing to take a bit of a punt on something that isn't Japanese. The quality has gone up, undoubtedly. 10 years ago, I would have said stay clear. Now I will say have a think about it. One thing that you will find with particularly with the Chinese motorcycles, is that they do not develop the full 14.6 horsepower that you're entitled to on a 125. Some of the Japanese bikes do, some don't. But if you do have the full 14.6 horsepower, 11 kilowatt, if I recall correctly, that bike will do around about 65 to 70 miles per hour on a relatively still day. That makes it suitable-ish for commuting on higher speed roads out of city centres. Some of the Chinese bikes are barely capable of punting out 9 horsepower, little more than half what the Japanese bikes do, and that means they can struggle to get much over 50 miles per hour, and that could be significant if you're doing a long ride out of town. You'll be holding other traffic up rather than going with the flow. So have a think about that as well. On the other hand, if you're stuck in a 20 mile per hour limit, then it really doesn't matter that you've got the full Monty 11 kilowatt. Have a think too about whether you're looking at this as just as an interim period to get you through the next few weeks, or whether you're planning on switching to a 125 long term. You can buy a fairly budget bike and probably get most of your money back if you bought it secondhand in 6 months' time. If you buy a brand new Chinese bike, you will get a fraction of what you paid for it back in 6 months' time. The Japanese bikes will hold their value rather better. A couple of other things to say is that with a lot of kit, you can build it up a bit as you go. Waterproofs, for example, it's spring right now. We've had a particularly dry spell. It will rain, but you could feasibly start adding to your riding kit as you go. Okay. Lots of advice around on the internet about what to buy, but basically just use a bit of common sense. And if you really don't know what you're looking at, get some help from someone who does. I'm always available to answer questions on things like this. I can't ride every bike, obviously, but I've usually got a fairly good idea of what does and what doesn't constitute a good deal. So yeah, drop me a line if you need some help. All right, okay, so that's time to round off. Apologies for the broadband break in the middle. Don't forget, if you have enjoyed the show, you can head over to my coffee page, which is, oddly enough, Survival Skills, where you will find some subscriber and supporter content going up over there. So for a price for coffee, you'll get access 30 days to supporter content. And if you subscribe with a monthly payment of just £3, you will get access to my online e-course, and that is going up steadily as I talk. Right, so a little bit later than planned, but thanks for watching. I see we've lost some viewer numbers, probably due to the broadband break, but hopefully they'll come back and watch the catch up. See you again on Sunday, and next time out. Bye for now.